Welcome to the Crime Redefined podcast, produced by Zero Cliff Media. Coming to you from the US Bank Tower, high above downtown Los Angeles. In our podcast, we drill deep into forensics and criminal investigation from the viewpoint of the defense, as well as explore the intersection of the media and the justice system.
Thanks for joining us on Crime Redefined. We hope everyone is well, enjoying our podcast. Today's guest is a man of mystery. In fact, Mehul, we don't even know his real name.
Yes, we are interviewing a man who goes by the name of Shay Doyle. And the reason he does not use his real name is because he was a high-profile law enforcement agent in the UK who worked deep undercover in and around Manchester for a number of years. So you can only imagine how dangerous that mission was. Shay's got a new book coming out entitled Deep Cover: How I Took Down Britain's Most Dangerous Gangsters.
You know, Shay wrote this book along with Scott Heeskat. He was an investigative journalist, TV and radio producer. Scott has written for all the biggies, publications such as The Times, Daily Mail, The Guardian, and Vice. He writes about intense topics such as prisons, terrorism, murders, and organized crime.
Yes, and as such, the pairing of Scott and Shay works wonderfully in this book. This is definitely a book that does not disappoint. It's just such a very detailed description of what it takes to work deep undercover in the highest stakes policing, just in the most dangerous of situations.
Absolutely. And I'm not going to give anything away, but even more importantly, it sheds light in Shay's book on the high price that undercover agents pay in terms of their health and well-being. These are some things that we just don't think about.
True.
Shay went through hell for sure. And hopefully this book, it helps in his healing.
Well, Dion, let's now go on an adventure into the UK's most dangerous neighborhoods and the gangsters that operate there.
Shay, thank you so much for joining us on Crime Redefined today.
Yeah, hi. Great to be here, guys. Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. Hey, Mehul and I really enjoyed reading your new book and are excited to talk to you about your incredible story.
Great to speak to you. Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, so Shay, to kind of get warmed up here, for some of the readers who may not be familiar with some of the UK terminology and slang or even like police speak, let's start with having you define a few words if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, let's do it.
Okay, so when you are conducting an investigation, what is the plot?
So the plot, when I was working undercover, the plot would be the area or the location where I was operating. So I would refer to it in reports or in debriefs as when I was on the plot. So, for example, one of the areas I infiltrated was a place called Moss Side in Manchester, and I would refer to it as the plot.
Okay, and what does it mean if somebody is a grasser?
A grass is an informant. An informant, someone who has a relationship with the police and gives them information.
Okay, how about a straight goer?
So a straight goer is somebody who is not a criminal, a non-criminal.
Okay. And then one word that comes up a lot in your book, a punter.
A punter. Oh, so a punter might be someone I'm buying, doing a deal with. Someone I'm buying or selling and doing a deal with.
Oh, great. How long would you say this book has been in the works? And then I'm curious, how did you connect with your co-author?
It's complete chance. Well, I say complete chance. To be fair, Scott, who I've wrote the book with, he's a sort of a pretty established journalist here in the UK. And he did some work where he was embedded with the gang unit in Greater Manchester Police. And someone had told him that there was this mythical person who'd infiltrated Moss Side, where the gang unit operated, and had basically lived there as a gangster. And so he sort of made some inquiries, and I ended up at a do where he was. And someone, he tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You're the guy that, I believe you're the undercover guy that infiltrated Moss Side." So I said, "Yeah, how do you know?" kind of thing. And so we got chatting, and he said, "Look, I think you've got a fantastic story. I think it'd make a great book." And I kind of laughed him out the building, really, thinking who's going to be interested in that. And then he said, "Look, let me sit down with you for a day. Let me put some words together. Let me take it to some publishers. Let's see what comes back. What harm can it do?" And 2 weeks later, we had a deal with Penguin. So there you go.
Wow. So really, you didn't really have any designs on or thoughts about doing a book. It was just him approaching you and then sitting down, getting this, couple of stories on paper, and then that was that.
Pretty much. I mean, it never entered my head to write a book. It caused me some sleepless nights at the start because, given the kind of work I was involved in,
right.
I really put my head above the parapet, and sort of show myself, if you like. And so it did cause me some sleepless nights, but I weighed it up, and all in all, I think I've made the right decision to get the story out there.
Well, we think so. Like we said, it's a great read. So we want to establish a little bit of a background. Tell us about your life growing up in Manchester and what your family dynamic was like, and then how all of that prepared you to be an undercover officer.
Yeah. So I don't know what you guys know about Manchester in England, but it's got a reputation as such. It's quite it's an area that's historically been connected with a lot of gangs and street gangs and sort of organised criminality. It's got quite a presence around that. It's a real melting pot of diverse sort of backgrounds, Irish background, lots and lots of diversity. And I grew up in an area that was a pretty rough part of town. I grew up in a second generation Irish family. My mum was one of 9. She had 7 brothers. All of them were on the periphery of criminality to varying degrees. My uncle was probably much more of an organised criminal, quite a serious sort of criminal. And then her brothers, in varying degrees, were involved in petty criminality, from shoplifting to you name it. And so I had a sort of upbringing around that sort of thing and criminality. My dad, hard-working guy, but he'd been fetched to be in the care system, and I'd had a tough childhood. So he had his own problems. So yeah, I had a pretty tough, chaotic upbringing to a degree, but learnt a lot and certainly gathered skills subconsciously, I think, at the time, that I took into my career later on when I was working undercover.
Well, Shay, I see that you joined the military at the ripe young age of 16, and it seemed like a perfect fit for you. First of all, what year was that?
1994.
1994. Okay. So, I mean, do you think that had you stayed in the military, you could have had a fulfilling lifelong career?
Yeah, I think, to be honest with you, I think what worked against me in the military was joining so young, because I was 16, I was a child. I look back now, I think I was a bloody child,
Yeah.
And I think possibly if I'd joined a little bit maturer, I would have had the full career in the military and maybe gone on to do some interesting things in the military. But, you join at 16, you do, I did nearly 8 years. You start to think that the grass is greener, you're going to give other things a go. I met a girl, and life changes and you think you're missing some at home. And then unfortunately, my dad committed suicide. So I kind of, the hankering to be near home and my mum and family became stronger than the military for me.
Sure.
Let's move in after the military, and you started to get into do undercover work. Can you tell our listeners what is a level 1 undercover officer, and what did you have to endure to become one?
Yeah, so within the UK policing framework, there's level 2 and level 1 undercover officers. So level 2 are as the number sort of says, it's the level below level 1, obviously, and they will sort of do the character of a low-level drug user and do small, low-level drug buys of user amounts of heroin, crack cocaine, and that kind of stuff. And they will dress up as, a street person who's addicted to crack or heroin. And they'll go out, and it's a really dangerous job. And they go out into neighbourhoods and they'll buy crack and heroin all day long. And then they'll go back, gather their evidence, go back the next day until there's lots and lots of subjects who need arresting for drug dealing. That's a typical level 2 operation. They may last a month, they may last 6 months. So level 1 is the highest level of undercover work that you can do here in the UK. And it basically means that once you're qualified, you can work for any UK police service, any foreign partner, such as the FBI, for example, could utilise a level 1 UC from the UK, European police forces, as I did do. And to get there, it's quite a stringent testing selection procedure. It takes around 9 months from start to finish. And you start off doing psychological testing, psychometric testing, intelligence testing, various role plays, and it all culminates leading to a concentrated course at the end of it, where you are basically put through sleep deprivation, put into really sort of stressful environments and stressful situations to see how you cope and perform. Sleep deprivation becomes key. I mean, you really find out who people are when you strip them back with no sleep, and put them in them stressful positions. And can they still think? Can they still think? Operate? Are they safe to operate when that stress is hitting them? Because level 1 UCs will do operations sometimes that can last years. You could go undercover for years, very much like Donnie Brasco in New York, when he infiltrated the mafia. I think he did 6 years. Sometimes it could be up to 6-7 years sometimes. And so you have to have somebody that is completely self-sufficient, self-reliant, self-motivated, isn't going to wilt at the first sign of stress, isn't going to sort of lay down and die. Someone that's got that motivation to crack on and get the job done.
So you talked about one night during your trial, your training, where the superiors kind of said, hey, we'll get you some beer and some pizza, and you don't have to wake up till 9 a.m. the next day. Can you kind of tell us why you thought something was up, and then just briefly what happened after that?
Yeah, they're slowly ramping up the sort of paranoia. They try and make you think that you're always being watched 24/7. Everything you do is being monitored, and every little thing that you say or do is going to come back and haunt you. And throw in that the sleep deprivation, you start to believe it. And I just had this feeling, get a beer. We may have had 4 or 5 days straight sleep deprivation by this point. Get a beer, get a pizza, and some of the people, some of the candidates dived straight in. And I was just like, this is just too good to be true,
Right.
Guys, we're not here for fun and pizza, beers and pizza, We're here for a reason. So I just thought, you know what, I'm gonna get some sleep, grab it where you can. That military thing kicking in, I think, the military thing, certainly when you could sleep in the military, you slept, because you never knew when you were going to need your energy reserves. And so that was just my thinking. And then sure enough, tomorrow morning's a late start, have a beer. Sure enough, 2:00 in the morning, the door goes in, and frog marched outside by guys in balaclavas and strips, and told them back out on a task now. So it's all to mess with your mind and play with your resilience.
So it sounds like the golden ring then to get through all that was to join Omega. So how old were you at that point, and what exactly is Omega, and why is that such a distinguished group of folks?
So Omega was the level 1 undercover unit of Greater Manchester Police, and they were pretty much the sort of real founders and forebearers of modern day undercover work in the UK. And they were real sort of, they really sort of, was the first people out there, along with the Met in London, doing infiltrations into the football hooligans and stuff like that. And they had a really forward-thinking guy who ran the unit there at the time, who said, look, this tactic is so successful that we could use this against serious organised criminals and in counter-terror operations. And so he set about redesigning the unit to basically select officers who could come in, get through the selection procedure, and become part of Omega. So it was a really sort of prestigious thing to get to become a member of Omega. And when I did the selection course, there was about 400 people attempted it, and 3 of us passed.
And then how old were you when you joined?
I was 26.
You see, that was one of the reoccurring kind of like themes I was reading this was taking your age at the time to what you were doing. And I kept thinking, wow, this guy's 24. Wow, this guy's 25, 26 years old. And I'm just like, my head was really exploding trying to marry those two thoughts together.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if you were any older and maturer, you wouldn't do it because you have to think.
You'd know better.
Sometimes being young and dumb pays off. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
You drew a really interesting comparison to the moving Training Day when you were being inaugurated into the UC work. Can you explain why?
Yeah. So I was, as I started going through the process, The main head instructor, who was an ex-parachute regiment soldier, who was a veteran of the Falklands War, and he's identified me and basically thought this lad's got a bit of talent for this work, and he took it upon himself to take me under his wing. And I passed the selection, I passed the course, but that doesn't mean you're the finished article. That doesn't mean you're ready to throw into an operation. There's a lot of work to be done. You've got to knock the edges off. And so this guy, Christy Vincent, as we call him in the book, he grabbed me and he spotted my potential. And he really, really sort of gave me everything he knew. And he was rough with me, he was tough to me. He sort of really tried to break me down. But I knew it was because he wanted me to be the best at it. And he felt I could. And it really sort of resonated with me, that line in Training Day where Denzel Washington says to is it Ethan Hawke, it takes a wolf to catch a wolf. And that's exactly what he did to me.
I love that.
He made me more of a criminal than the criminals.
Well, let's talk about when you first put this all into play in your first plot. So who was Mikey Bryan? What went into creating him, and what was his ultimate mission?
So Mikey O'Brien was my alter ego. That was the name of the legend I had when I worked in Moss Side. So we'll just talk about Moss Side. So Moss Side is an area of Manchester that has suffered disproportionately with firearms and gang-related violence, numerous murders, numerous unsolved murders, gangs firing automatic weapons in the street. I'm sure you guys see a lot of this over in the USA. It's an area that's historically was known as Gunchester. It was the Wild West, if you like. It was the last sort of Wild West. And it was probably one of the worst, roughest gang-afflicted places in the UK. And it's predominantly a black area. And I'm a white guy. Nobody really wanted to do the job because of the dangers and the risk. And it was put around all the undercover sort of network in the UK. We're looking for somebody to infiltrate Moss Side and the gangs down there. And either they didn't want it, they felt it was too risky, too dangerous, because when we work undercover, we're not armed. We're not armed over here. So nobody really wanted it. And then there was, what kind of profile do we need? Do we need a black guy? Because a lot of the gangs historically were black. Albeit, don't get me wrong, they were exclusively black. There was white guys mixed in with the black guys, but historically, predominantly black guys. And nobody wanted it. So it was seen as the poison chalice of undercover work. And they approached me because I did pretty well on the course. I sort of came top of the course. I'd done some work when I first arrived with Christy, where I'd sort of excelled and put some people away and shown that I was the real deal. And they said, would you be interested in doing it? Would you do it? We think you can do it. If anyone can pull it off, we think it'd be you. So being the young and dumb, as we said before, thinking that bullets bounce off me and nothing can hurt me, and wanting to prove myself and arrogance or whatever, the arrogance of youth or whatever it may be, I decided, I'm going to be the man that does this.
For one thing you said that stuck out, for us in the U.S., the fact that you're doing this deep undercover work in the most dangerous area and you don't have a gun just kind of blows our mind.
Mayhel, you beat me you stole my question.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Crazy when I read that.
So you described later in other operations that there is a firearms unit that can come in certain situations. But what is the criteria to actually have armed officers, work on something?
Well, undercover, you just don't carry firearms in the UK. It's as simple as that. It's just not within our legislative framework. It's not what we do. Obviously, in England, we do have access. We do have firearms units that can come in and deal with those issues, but they just would not have been aware that I was working undercover there. So in the UK, you are very much alone. You have a phone and a direct line to your cover officer who looks after your welfare while you're undercover, and he is your direct line to any cavalry that may be coming. But by the time they've come, it would all be done and over with.
But just a quick question. If you're portraying a villain, would it look out of place to not have a gun?
No, because I think the culture here in the UK is very different from the US.
I see.
A lot of our criminals here who carry firearms. Yes, you will get some that carry a firearm daily and routinely, but generally, what they'll do here is they'll have firearms put down, and they will only go and pick them up if they're going to go and use them, and then they'll put them back down because they don't want to get caught with a firearm because it's a mandatory 5-year sentence.
Yeah, I noticed that was kind of a reoccurring theme that they had. In fact, it's going to kind of lead into my next comment. Is the scene with the part where you go into the house, you're in first, and you encounter the criminal in the bed with I think it was a Benelli 12 gauge or something, and you've got no, the guys with the guns are on the outside. You're charging in, and you got to close the distance on him so he doesn't get it out. But wasn't he like a place where they held guns for criminals?
No, yeah, that was it. He was the storeman. So he was basically a patsy, and they would store firearms there. And I mean that was after I was undercover. But I kind of peeled the duvet back, and there he was with a Benelli pump action shotgun and a Glock pistol. So I just jumped on him instinctively, really. And I later found a Scorpion submachine gun and a Tariq 9mm.
That was crazy
in the wardrobe, as you do.
It's kind of a nice little segue to my next question. How did you get around some of the hurdles of undercover work, like not committing any crimes or not using drugs as part of your cover? I noticed you had some of the I guess workarounds were really clever.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I suppose the level of criminal I was playing, Mikey O'Brien was, a professional armed robber. I wasn't sort of a down and out criminal. I was a criminal with access to resources, money, nice cars. And somebody like that, you wouldn't necessarily push around to take drugs. They would have the sort of presence to say, I ain't doing that line of cocaine. I ain't doing it. So that was something I always had in my mind. But equally, just to stop getting asked to do it
all the time, right?
I had a female undercover officer who worked alongside me as my girlfriend, and we used to say that we were trying for IVF, to have a baby, and that I needed to stay clean and and all that kind of stuff. And I'd done it in the past and been on steroids and been on coke and whatnot. So and it's actually quite surprising when you give that sort of human story to a lot of criminals, they'll start to protect you. Hey, they're trying for a baby, they've actually got a real human side to them, and so it just wasn't really an issue for me, drugs.
I also thought that there was Mail and I thought it was interesting, a high level of fitness involved with criminals. Everybody was into Thai boxing and fitness and working out. That was really interesting.
Well, certainly at the level I was, a lot of the gang members, a lot of the serious organized criminal guys, they were, your physical capability is your prowess, really, because if you're going to go on the road and do a bank robbery or do a cash in transit robbery, you need to be fit, and that's what I was reporting. I was, a cash in transit robber, a serious armed robber, So that definitely is a thing here in the UK. That your more organised criminals, they take pride in their appearance and the gym rats.
Can you take us to Cambridge? Here in the States, we think of like this glamorous, kind of university town. But tell us about Mikey Bulger and why he was sent to Cambridge.
So, I was at Mikey Bulger over in Cambridge. So, basically, I needed to get out of Manchester. It was closing. It was my home city. I was getting compromised all the time there. I'd sort of taken out some really good level players in my side. But it was getting sort of silly me staying there. So a job was put to me to do in Cambridge. And again, we think of Cambridge as this university town, this pretty place. And that's how I thought about it, to be honest. And then I drove down there thinking this is going to be great. And they took me to the local, as you call them over there, the projects, the housing estate. And it was pretty grim. Everyone was smoking crack. Everybody was a thief. Everybody was a burglar. There was prostitutes. There was guys up from London taking over houses and selling crack cocaine. It was a pretty rough place. And so I set myself up there as a hijacker, a lorry hijacker who was involved in buying stolen property. And so I basically integrated myself into the criminal community. I ended up buying over £300,000 worth of stolen property from vehicles, motorbikes, jewellery, televisions, you name it. And I spent about 13 months there undercover.
Yeah, you were running a brisk business there.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, I was, if it had been a real business, I'd been a rich man.
Could have retired, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I've been in the Bahamas now. But yeah, no. So yeah, it's it went really well, the operation. But it sounds really glamorous, doesn't it? People think about undercover and the movies and that. But you know what? It's really lonely work. It's very anxiety inducing. It can play with your psyche. You start to get paranoid. Are people, have they clocked you? Do they think you're a cop? And when you start doing it, I was doing it for a long, years at a time. I wasn't doing it for a week here, a week there. I was doing it for years at a time. So, it can play with your psyche, and that's eventually what it did with me,
It's astonishing that you were able to keep all of that straight for so long. It really goes to your strength. But before we move on, I got to say, I laughed out loud about the CIA laptop being stolen.
Yes.
I mean, you can't make that up.
No, I know exactly. Yeah, you couldn't make it up, could you? Yeah, but yeah. So they owe me one. The American government owe me one.
Yeah. Play that card if you ever have problems getting into customs,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah, it's coming out.
All right, Shay, let's talk about, I guess, maybe the main villain of the book, Dale Cregan, the one-eyed killer. You actually crossed paths with him very early, I guess, in your career and in his career. Tell us about how you did first cross paths with him and what stuck out to you about Cregan that you knew he would be trouble later on.
So before I went undercover, I did a couple of years in uniform as a cop, doing normal sort of response duties, and then I very quickly got asked to join an organised crime unit, which was plainclothes sort of work, doing surveillance and stuff like that. And so Cregan and some of his associates were very young at that point, younger than myself, and they were an up-and-coming crime group, and they were very much involved in burglaries and low-level drug dealing. But they were violent, they were involved in violent robberies of vehicles and stuff like that, and sort of increasing levels of violence used in their offending. And so they came on my radar, and me and a colleague set up an operation up to sort of target them. So as part of that, you want to get to know what their routines are, who they associate with, what vehicles they use. So I really sort of took a really close look and put them under the microscope. So I got to know pretty much about them and their sort of personalities and ways, and lots of criminals you can engage with, and they're quite gregarious, and they manage you as we manage them, and you can even have a laugh with some of them, but Cregan and some of his crew, they just weren't of that ilk, they had a real nasty, malevolent streak to them, and I knew early in my career that they would grow and become much bigger, which is what they did.
You laid some great groundwork for this. Foundation for this. Can you tell us about the turbulent times in Gangland, UK that ultimately led to the murder of the two female officers by Dale Cregan?
Yeah, so Cregan sort of aligned himself to an East Manchester crime family, like a really established crime family, and they were in a dispute with another crime family, and both equally as violent as each other, both access to guns, and both sides had committed serious acts of violence on numerous occasions involving drug dealing, loan sharking, you name it. And that had gone on for many, many years. It culminated in a dispute in a pub. A bit of a fight kicks off over words over nothing, really. And then, someone decides that the other side, the opposite side to Cregan, have got to go. So Cregan, the opposite side are in a pub one night. Cregan pulls up in a stolen car with a couple of his guys. He has a balaclava on, walks into the pub and shoots the son of the head of the group dead in the pub, and shoots three others as well. They live, and the son of the head of the organised crime group dies. So then now we've got a situation where you've got a very violent man whose son's just been murdered, seeking revenge. Or at least Cregan thought he was seeking revenge. Lots and lots of threats, lots of now police. We've got a serious situation on our hands here that we need to manage. We really do not want these people going out shooting willy-nilly.
And the father and son, that's the Shorts?
The Short family, yes, that's correct. Yeah, the Short family. So then I think it's about 3 weeks after he killed, 2 or 3 weeks after he kills Mark Short, the son, David Short, the father's in his back garden, and Cregan and one of his friends turn up at his back garden and shoot him dead and throw a grenade at him in his back garden and kill him.
Jeez.
Yeah, and it was the first time in the UK that grenades had been used in anger, if you like, outside Northern Ireland. So we've now got a really serious situation.
Then there was a lot of scrutiny on Cregan, obviously, because now you have this escalating gang war. What were some of the tactics used to get at Cregan? And then if you could just tell us at least briefly about, the ambush of the 2 female officers.
Yeah. So because I'd been involved with investigating this crime group earlier in my career, I was pulled in and the police were using every covert tactic you can think of, bugs in houses, you name it, they were doing it. And I got pulled in and none of it was working. He was a criminal who had access to cash, resources, criminal associates all over the country. So, he's a very difficult person to pin down. Plus, he was very disciplined about his use of the phone and things like that. So he was proving quite a difficult person to house and capture. Plus, he had access to firearms and grenades and willing to use them with not a great deal to lose now. So I was dragged in and said, look, we can't get this guy. We need to go the old-fashioned way and get out on the ground and get information off people who may know. And, a lot of the cops were coming back with the tail between the legs, really. It takes a certain kind of cop to swim in them circles and get information. And, I had a reputation as one who could do that, along with a couple of others. And so they put us together and we got out on the ground and basically did what we do and started making waves and putting doors in, locking up some of his gangster friends and shaking them down for information. And, but it wasn't all sort of enforcement work. We would pay people. We were adept at trying to make friends with people, finding out what their Achilles heel were to get the information. And all we were trying to do effectively was bring the manhunt to a safe closure, really, get him in custody with no more killing. And the morning, the night before he killed the 2 cops, I get a phone call from an informant. And I'm told that he's in the area, which I report back. I come back into work and I end up sort of monitoring phones overnight to see if I can get more information about where he might be to house him so we can get a firearms unit down there. I then go out that morning, no further information comes. I go out that morning and I put a door in, I put a door through and conduct a warrant 300 metres away from where he actually was and sort of shake down one of his drug dealer gangster friends and leave there empty-handed. He won't tell me where he is. And the words he said to me was, even if I knew where he was, I wouldn't tell you because I'm more scared of him than you.
Jeez.
So that's what he said to me that morning, which always resonates with me, stayed with me really. And then literally a few hours later, I get a phone call off my boss. Cregan's handed himself in at Hyde police station. He's just killed two female officers. As we know, he fired numerous rounds at them and threw a grenade at them. And then he drove a car down. The night before, just going back a bit, he kept a family hostage with children in bed in this family. He kept them hostage in there overnight till he decided what he was going to do obviously killed the 2 cops, lured them on with a phone call saying there'd been a window put through at the address. Killed the 2 girls, unfortunately. And then I got tasked to go and deal with him in the immediate aftermath. So myself and my colleagues raced there and I had to sort of forensically bag his hands after he murdered the 2 girls, just to make sure that, we kept any blood or gunshot residue, stuff like that. I had to carry out an emergency interview, about the vehicle he'd arrived in. We suspected it could be booby trapped with a grenade or anything like that. Unfortunately, someone had to do it, and it was me and my colleagues.
Yeah, so that leads me to my next question. In this case specifically, how in the hell were you able to keep your composure and compartmentalize, what you were doing?
I think at the end of the day, I've been a soldier and I've been a cop all my life, so I think I've become quite adept at compartmentalizing things up until that point, anyway. And I don't know, you're just almost an autopilot. You're a professional. I was a professional cop. Mm-hmm. It wasn't the first time I'd seen gunshot wounds. It wasn't the first time I'd seen blood or bodies. It unfortunately, the career choices I've made, these things were pretty standard and normal. Not that killing 2 cops is normal, that isn't. But I just was able to switch off that part of my brain and deal with it as a professional police officer, which is what the situation needed.
And then I assume, that requirement of becoming hardened to this stuff, I would assume that would affect your personal life on some level.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, certainly after Cregan, my mental health started to suffer. But it wasn't just the Cregan, the murder of the two cops. It was everything I'd done, really. Some of the treatment I had from management as well massively impacted my mental health. And, I wasn't particularly looked after very well by the police after undercover work. And just slowly, it was a slow dripping tap with me. My mental health started to really sort of decline. But being a cop, being, an ex-soldier, you don't sort of put your hand up and say, I think I need help. What you do is you throw yourself deeper into work, which is what I did.
That's a great statement for us to pivot on. How did it all go wrong? Why do you think so many people in the department had it in for you? At least that's how it reads.
Yeah, I think it was just a clash. There was a huge clash of personalities in there. You had management of the undercover unit who had no experience around undercover work. And so when I would, I was pretty experienced by that point at dealing with undercover work and the intricacies of it. They'd not been in that world. They hadn't been an operative. They hadn't even been around it as a detective, on the management side of it. They were new into that world. And when I would tell them, no, that's wrong, you shouldn't do that, I think it may come across as me being arrogant or something, but it certainly wasn't meant that way. It was because I knew better. I had more experience. And unfortunately, some management see that as an asset, and some see it as a threat. And unfortunately, I think I was seen as a threat.
Well, Shay, something that happened towards the end of your career, the last few years of your career, was the infamous bombing at the Ariana Grande concert in 2017. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what role you had in the investigation?
Yeah, so obviously the Salman Abedi was the bomber, Libyan bomber, and he took it upon himself to go and bomb a children's concert of the Ariana Grande concert, which was largely attended by young people and children, really. Pretty evil act, pretty heinous evil act. And I wasn't involved on the night, but in the immediate aftermath, I was a detective sergeant now in the serious organised crime unit, and we were all made available to the Northwest Counter-Terrorism Unit. And I initially led a search for CCTV of the bomber's approach to the arena. And we were able to locate some of him getting out of a taxi and things like that. And then I was working pretty much 18-hour days it was all hands to the pump, really. It was all hands to the pump. Everyone mucking in, children dead and just the horrific incident that had gone on. Everybody just wanted to do everything they could and the best they could to find out what had gone on and just absolutely abhorrent. And then I was part of a team that we went and located two guys that were connected to the bomber. Ended up back on my old stomping ground in Moss Side where I worked undercover, and we went through the door and arrested a couple of guys there who connected to the bomber.
It sounds like kind of all roads lead back to that plot, as you say.
Yeah, it was. It haunted me and still does to a degree.
And then it was fascinating to read that you were actually working the memorial site as well the days after the bombing, correct?
Yeah, so the memorial, it was a really sort of emotional, a place called St Anne's Square in the centre of Manchester. It was like a sea of flowers, of well-wishers and, people grieving. And every night people would come down there and just grieve and have them, show respect and pay silent for those that had lost their lives. But, I was acutely aware that this was a real,
another opportunity,
a secondary area to hit. If I was a terrorist, I'd be thinking, great place to hit. You've got a large concentration of people. So, of course, we had firearms and a big police presence down there. But I would mingle with the crowd, as did other officers covertly, just to, look for anything out of the ordinary and make sure that people were safe.
Wow. Shay, what reforms do you think need to be put in place in the UK police system so that others don't have to go through what you did?
They have to go and see and do things that most people don't see once in a lifetime, sometimes 2-3 times a week, more sometimes, and I think management, we've got to become more knowledgeable about mental health I think there's also got to be a culture that says it's okay to put your hands up and say, I'm struggling at the moment, because there's a real fear in the police. If you do that, your career's over. You're not going to let you handle a firearm in firearms again, or a specialist department. They're not going to let you work undercover. You know, if I'd have put my hand up undercover and said, I'm really struggling, I would have been finished that day.
Yep.
And I think we need to understand that just because someone's going through a period of stress or struggling with their mental health doesn't necessarily mean their useful life is finished, you know?
Right.
And I think certainly in America and Canada, the police forces are way ahead of the UK, and we could learn massive amount from them.
I would have thought it would have been the other way around for some reason. I thought that the UK would be out in front of the States as far as having police procedures in place.
Absolutely not. And I think certainly in the UK at the moment, there's lots of scrutiny, as there is in the USA. There's lots of scrutiny around policing, and a real disconnect between the public and the police, more so than I've ever seen in my lifetime, I would say. And I think you've probably been suffering with that over in the US, I think, to a degree. I think we need to get back to people-centered management in the police. It's been very much about processes, procedures, and disciplinary. You know, I think we need to get back to managing cops as people, and managers need to sort of treat people as individuals. And I think that would achieve, you get more out of that individual in the workplace, but also, you know, they may have change the culture where they feel they can put their hand up and say, you know what, I'm struggling.
Yeah, you're just not a tool in the toolbox, that you're actually, there's a real human being behind this.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, unfortunately, I kind of have a bit of a cynical view now that, you know, I was a number, I was a tool, as you just said. And I just don't think that should be the case. You know, I think cops are human beings like anybody else. And, you know, they see and do things, destruction, death, you know, on an almost daily and weekly basis. And we should look after them. That's my view.
Absolutely.
Well, Shay, how helpful was writing this book for you to sort of process your trauma, and how are you doing today?
Yeah, do you know what? Writing the book really gave me focus. It gave me something to concentrate on. I was lost after the cops because I'd spent my life either as a soldier or a cop, and, you know, 25 years of it. What I didn't know what else to do. You know, I haven't got any other skills. I don't know. I was really, really lost, and that really hurt my head for a while. And then, you know, the idea of the book came along, and I really threw myself into the book. And I realised that, you know, if I can get a platform to talk about mental health, particularly in, you know, emergency services and the police, then maybe I can impact change and affect change. And it was really sort of cathartic writing the book with my co-writer, you know, looking at really where things had gone wrong, identifying where I could have maybe done things differently, but also looking at where the police got things wrong. You know, my book isn't about bashing the police. I enjoyed the police. You know, I loved my job at the time. But yeah, we all get things wrong, and I'd love to think that they can be learning from my book.
You know what? It doesn't read that way, at least not for us, that you were bashing them. I think it was just kind of a statement of fact of what you went through. But if some point in the future, if they decide that, hey, they want to write some kind of a manual for dealing with this, the book is there. That's what I would follow. There's your format of what you need to address, and do something where you're 3 months on or 3 months off. I didn't get a sense there was any decompression time for you, you know, to be able to just relax, put your feet up, and then move on to the next. It just seems like you were always burning at a 9.5 out of 10.
Yeah, absolutely. But equally, that was also my fault because I wanted to operate at that level. You know, I was always seeking the next big job. And cops will, you know, people, when you're a highly motivated individual, you will seek the next biggest thing, the next most high risk operation you can get involved in. And sometimes you need someone, you know, with more knowledge, seniority to say, let's just sit this one out, you know, and not be a punishment, you know, that be, we're looking after you.
Would you have listened if someone came, like, I know there was a number of
without doubt, I would have kicked back from it, but, you know, I would have kicked back from it. But with hindsight and with maturity, and having gone through what I've gone through, I think it's almost, if we build that into, this is how we operate, you're not always going to be operating at full tilt. You know, sometimes you've got to take a back seat because it will give you longevity. and it will help your mental health, and your family are important as well as the operations and the jobs, I think that would take the sting out of the tail if you were telling people you're going to sit this one out, you know?
Well, Shay, in terms of some of your ex-colleagues that you're still in touch with, how prevalent are issues with PTSD for some of those folks?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that a lot of cops, you know, or ex-cops, unfortunately hide. You know, and lie to themselves about, as I did. You know, I lied to myself that I was unwell. I always say I was the last person to know I was unwell. And unfortunately, I think that's probably the case with a lot of people. They struggle behind closed doors, and that's what I want my book to do. Maybe give people the strength to say, you know what, it's okay to go and get a bit of help. Don't get to the point he was, you know, because I lost my job, I lost my house, you know, I had to start again. But yeah, I do have colleagues who suffer from PTSD from work they've done, and they openly talk about it. And not just the work, some of the treatment they've had that's caused PTSD. So yeah, a friend of mine who's an ex-undercover officer from Amiga, he's very open about it. He's wrote a book himself, actually, and he's very open about his struggles with his mental health and PTSD. So there are some of us standing up now to talk about it. So I hope it encourages the conversation within the policing in the UK.
Absolutely. And then speaking of that, on your book, how do you hope this book, what do you hope it will do for other people?
Do you know what? I really, really hope that people read it, sort of the public who don't really understand policing or just think, you know, the police give out parking tickets and are there to annoy people, kind of read it and go, do you know what? There's actually some people out there putting themselves on the line to keep you safe in the life you have without you even knowing it sometimes. And thank God we've got them. Thank God we've got them. And I hope some people take that from them, because, you know, the police get a bashing sometimes. You know, we pick up on the one thing that they do wrong, but we never see the 99 other things they've done right. You know, and certainly at the operational end, cops I work with day to day, in the main, we're good people wanting to do right by people. And I think that's right the world, you know, the world across. You know, I think that's generally the kind of person that wants to join the cops.
Well, Shay, obviously in the coming months, you'll be busy promoting your book, but what else is next for you?
Yeah, so the book, I'm working on a fiction book. So I'm currently sort of getting my head in the laptop writing that and sort of seeing where I can take that.
You got the writing bug, it sounds like.
Yeah, definitely. No, definitely. Without doubt, I've got the writing bug, and I've got so much sort of real life material buzzing around my head that I feel like
I would say so.
Great fiction, you know, sort of realistic fiction. And there's talk of maybe the book being turned into a drama or something like that.
Definitely. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, so, you know, I'm hoping if that does happen, I could be involved in the production side of that and advising around it. And pretty much, you know, I'm open to offers. But my big passion is sort of mental health and guiding young kids away from estates like I grew up on, rough areas, trying to get them away from guns and gangs and stuff like that, and knife crime, which we're struggling with here in the UK. And a big passion of mine was boxing growing up. I was very much into boxing, and a friend of mine's a professional boxer, and we'd love to get like a gym going where we could, try and get kids away from environments where we grew up. And
excellent. That's great.
You know, so that would be my passion, really.
And just out of curiosity, do you do any like mentoring of people who are still in the police department or youngsters just starting out?
Well, funnily enough, and it's funny you should say this, you know, because I offered to go back to a police force and speak. I offered my time for free to speak, and they didn't want me to come in.
You got to be kidding!
Wow,
boy, no. the abuse continues.
That's so. To this day, they're still on it, huh?
Yeah, they didn't want me to come in, and I think they think I'm a police basher. I hate the police and the organisation, but they couldn't be more wrong. You know, I've got, you know, so much respect for the boys and girls that go out and put themselves at risk and on the ground every day that, you know, I'd love to stand there and say to them, look, just look after yourself as well, because, you know, don't end up like me. Don't be Shay.
Well, Shay, what a pleasure speaking with you today. We appreciate your time, and we wish you good luck with this book. I mean, we can't recommend it enough.
Fantastic interview. Really, really appreciate your time.
No, honestly, guys, thank you so much for having me on, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
A couple of housekeeping points, Dion, before we get into our discussion. First, during the interview, we asked Shay about his thoughts on needed police reforms in the UK. And unfortunately, there was a bit of a technical glitch at the beginning of his answer. But not all was lost, as we still got to hear a lot of his thoughts. So I just cut out the first part of the answer, and we've got everything else.
I guess that's to be expected. It was an international interview, and these things happen.
This is just a hazard of this business. The other thing, Dion, was, you had dropped the CIA laptop story from the book. But the thing is, I don't think that our listeners had a frame of reference what you guys were talking about. Could you just break that down?
Sure. I really thought this, it's funny when I read the book. But basically, Shay and his team went undercover in Cambridge, and they're tasked with, trying to buy stolen goods. And one of the items that he bought was a CIA laptop that was stolen from an agent that was stationed there. And so he was able to buy this laptop, see who the owner was, and then return it. And luckily, hopefully, no information was leaked out on it. But this is why he says that in our interview with him that the U.S. government owes him one.
Yeah, no doubt. That could have been a real disaster and an embarrassment for the CIA agent, of course. But I mean, there's a lot of great little stories like that in the book. So, I mean, just to give you a couple of my thoughts, one thing that I was impressed about is how detailed the setup is for these undercover operations. In other words, what Shay would describe as a legend. So in other words, what is his backstory? Well, you've got to give him a criminal record that people, if were to look it up, they could see it. You've got to give him a new ID. You got to get his fingerprints out of the system or swap them with someone else. Not only that, but he goes into great detail in the book about how, well, part of his backstory was that, he had relatives in Ireland and he hung out a certain area. So what did he do? He went and lived there for a while, and he went to the pubs, and he kind of got a feel for it so that he could talk intelligently about it if he was ever pressed. And just things like, he and his partner, they didn't just get right into busting people. They went to the local pubs. They put out a certain air about themselves. They wrote about it in their Mercedes. They had a certain attitude. So this is weeks and weeks and weeks of, getting their rep out there before they actually really did any police work per se. And, another interesting point, I think, in the book, and actually Shay hit on this, is that it's just like any other business, isn't it? That sometimes the people who are in charge haven't done the actual work. And that was really frustrating to see Shay get all of this experience and be such an asset. And then the higher ups, who didn't understand the work he was doing, not taking his advice. And I mean, I've actually seen this in crime labs. I've worked in crime labs where the person in charge of the lab was not a scientist. So, I mean, how does that work? Just one more thought, Deanne, and then I'll throw it to you. It was interesting in his book, how addictive this undercover work can be. Yes, it's dangerous. Yes, it's lonely. But what a thrill. What a rush, particularly for a guy like Shay that excels in that. Why wouldn't you want to go on to the next case, onto the higher stakes, much like an addict would? And he describes in the book that undercover agents did have to check in with psychiatrists quarterly or something like that, but it was basically a sham. And as Shay said in the interview, there was none of this, someone sitting down with him and
no, this is the part that cost him, I think, mentally and physically. This is the part that really took a toll on him.
Yeah, that's right. No, he didn't have a mentor who sat him down and said, listen, man, you're great at this, but you got to have longevity. You don't want to burn out, on and on and on. Well, Dion, give me some of your thoughts.
I'll try to take I'll work in reverse, the last one first. So one of the things that was really frustrating and extremely disappointing was that he had no support. He was kind of on an island doing all this work, and you'd think that he would be supported at every turn for all of the different, busts that he made, high profile busts that he made over the course of the years. And it just seemed like there was so much jealousy, and he obviously had some support and some key people that were helping him along the way. But it was just amazing how much kind of like, backstabbing and stuff, and how they would really go out of their way to try to take him down. And it just seemed like it was pure spite and jealousy, because how can you, have someone so successful and then do nothing to support them and then try to just crush them at the same time? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, very true. And it's just, people sometimes resent you if you are good at your job or knowledgeable, and they just don't want to have the pride to listen to what you have to say. And but it's just, this happens in any business, really but it's particularly unfortunate when it happens in this kind of business where really lives are at stake if you're not doing the right strategy and operations or don't have the right resources. I mean, he describes a example where he had really gotten in good with this villain and he wanted to make a nice, drug buy to kind of show him that he was a man, and they wouldn't front him the cash to do it, which is really amazing. Could have put him in danger.
Yeah, that he had as much success that he did with little or no support at the time. Yeah. And then as far as his legend goes, it was amazing. Like sometimes while I was reading the book, I mean, I thought Shay was, his character was a real person, the way that he talked to him. And then later on, when he was talking I know we'll touch on this in a bit, some of the mental illness, he was kind of like having, like, what would Shay do? And he wanted to go back to that person because he knew he'd be strong. That was kind of, a little bit sad. I felt sorry for him at the same time, that's just kind of where he was. And that goes back to that he had little or no support, with these kind of checkups that they did for your mental status along the way. I thought that was really, really hard to listen to and really telling. So let me ask you this: how excited would you be to see this as a feature film or a series made from Shay's book?
Oh gosh, I'd be all over it. I mean, I think I said this earlier. To me, it was like watching an action adventure film, and it's. I mean, listen, sometimes reading can be boring. Let's face it. This was not. So I would love to see this on the big screen. I mean,
page turner is overused, but for me, this was a page turner. I mean, I was really hooked on every event that was taking place. And what's really interesting is the way that he just matter-of-factly would state some of this stuff, and had to keep asking myself, there's no way. I thought I was reading fiction by some of the stories that he tells.
Yeah. The book has really, really good pacing. And, I mean, Shay described that he's going to write a fiction book next, and it makes perfect sense. Cause like you say, how could this be real when you read it? Other things that are shocking in the book is this whole business about how, the cops in the UK don't necessarily carry guns unless there's some big special event. I mean, he was talking about one undercover operation where he picked up this villain and they were riding in a van, I think. And he was thinking in his mind, he was concerned about, does this guy have a gun or whatever? And my thoughts were, well, of course that's dangerous, but I was just thinking, well, you have a gun too. And what's the big issue? But I didn't realize right away when I was reading this book that he didn't have a gun with him. And I mean, how different is that just from the US culture, not only of policing, but of the criminals? I mean, it seems like in the US, the criminals aren't fit. They're not muscular. They're not athletic, but they all just wave a gun around.
Yeah, there's a couple thoughts on that. One is they don't use the guns, but I was shocked to hear how much hand grenades were used. I mean, that was crazy.
That's taking it to the next level.
It was like, okay, guns are illegal, but we're just going to either chop you up or we're going to throw a hand grenade at you. And I was surprised of how frequent like hand grenades were out throughout his book with some of the gangsters that were in.
Yeah, that's pretty heavy.
And then there was one particular scene that I got a couple of points to make on that in this book where he's going in to bust this guy. And Shay and his partner are the first one through the door. And the guys with the guns were not undercover and clearly defined, like you see those at a crime scene, like a big FBI or police on the back. So they were outside and they had the guns, but they weren't going through. And Shay and his partner were going through, and they ended up meeting someone who's laying in bed with I think it was a Glock and a 12 gauge pump, and either one of them had guns. And I find that this was absolutely insane and takes a huge pair of, to go through that door, knowing that the other people could be armed. I think, would they find a
huge pair of fists?
Yeah. Yeah. Huge pair of fists. And they think they a ton of ammunition and a 50 caliber. And yeah, they're just going through with their fists. And I find this absolutely crazy, but also, and we talked about this after the interview, that there was almost like an unspoken rule that the proper villains don't carry guns because they're afraid of what they can be put away for by carrying a gun. And so that's where they were going to bust, was this new kind of industry that had popped up where you had paid people that stored guns in their home for gangsters.
Yeah, it's funny how that seemed to actually be a deterrent, that penalty for the gangsters to be caught with a gun. And seemed like there's some weird sort of etiquette in the UK about like, yeah, we're going to use them when push comes to shove, but we're not just waving around like crazy willy nilly because it's just not worth it. So, wow, I mean, what a different world. So I think that another reason that would be great to have this on the big screen to just kind of explore the cultural differences in policing and in crime, I guess.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I won't carry a gun, but we'll throw a hand grenade at you.
Yeah. Well, Shay's book, again, is called Deep Cover, How I Took Down Britain's Most Dangerous Gangsters, and it will be available on March 3rd, 2022. It's published by eBerry Press, which is a part of Penguin Random House. And just like anything else, your best bet at ordering the book would be to find it on Amazon.
Yeah, Shay's an incredible man with an incredible story, and this is a riveting book and a must-read. Thanks again to all of our Crime Redefined listeners. Looking forward to bringing you more great episodes like this one. And please be sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook if you're so inclined. Please spread the word about us. And until next time.
Like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at Crime Redefined. Please send us your comments and questions and join us for the next episode.